Hi there, knife people. Hello, lady and gentlemen. Tonight I am going to respond to another request from several of my viewers this time, and that was to show my Grail knives. A Grail knife? I wouldn't know what that is. What I call these top of my collection knives are my inspiration knives because they inspire me to actually work on these videos, to spend time and energy seeking them out, or sometimes give me that pleasure of stumbling into something that I didn't even expect that I'd want. You've probably seen these cases in many of my videos, and the reason I put them in the glass cases is because you got your collection in front of your eyes. So let's see if I can zoom in. The reason my inspiration knives are not on the top shelf is because I wanted them to be more my eye level when I look at them. So let's open the door and take a look at the knives. This is my Spartan Harsey. These are my homemade clear vinyl hose supports. Actually, a very good and inexpensive solution to your knife displaying issues. So why this knife? This is a production, high-end to be sure, but production nevertheless. So how did it end up here? The inspiration for purchasing this knife was the movie called Lincoln, about Abe Lincoln. And there's a monologue there in the movie that talks about the moral compass. And this knife kind of reminds me of that quote from the movie. This is a Medford Nosferatu. Greg Medford is a very polarizing individual. People either love him or hate him. Folks call him all kinds of names. And one thing they don't call him is boring. Neither his designs nor his personality could be classified as that. And this knife is a living proof to me that anyone with perseverance and determination can become a knife maker. This knife is American Blade Works Model 2. Very inspirational name, Model 2. To me, this knife actually screams America, American ingenuity, American entrepreneurship. Just think about it. A young man somewhere in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina, in a tiny little shop equipped with one CNC machine, makes these small batch production knives, and they're beautiful. Look at the design. Think of Greyhound bus from the 50s or a silver bullet train. It's the very definition of the word Americana. And as far as its capability, I EDC'd it for months. It's a total banger. This is a 365 terrain Terravantium. The reason it's on the shelf, this knife actually represents the innovation, the drive to go into the unknown because of its blade. I mean, all the handle materials are on par with any premium knife, but the blade itself is made out of dendritic cobalt. This is not steel. It's a magic metal impregnable to corrosion, capable of slicing through any fibrous material, even when it's dull. All right, let's take a look what else is on this shelf. Those are my Chris Reeve knives, and they all made it into the shelf without exclusion because that's a company that achieved this perfect balance between looks and precision. Every knife is built with such care and attention to detail that it's probably one brand that you cannot ignore if you're a true knife collector. There are some videos that show how they are created and how much care goes into every single one of them. And that's why I display them here. So I'm not going to show all of them, but I will show you the one that I stumbled across lately. And it was just one of those lucky collector days for me. This is 31 Sebenza, MagnaCut blade, titanium handle, all that. You probably know how the Chris Reeve knife is built. But this one has what they call a unique graphic. And it's not really just graphic. It's a three-dimensional pattern that was manually machined. And it's not an oxymoron. It was machined using a manual mill by an employee of Chris Reeve named Lisa. She is set to retire this year, and so it is not clear if Chris Reeve will continue making these patterns. Another knife on this shelf, I have to get to it, is my little McNees. And by little, it's a mid-sized knife. And at the first glance, you probably wouldn't think it's a pinnacle knife. The reason I display it here is because I had a chance to talk to John McNees on the phone for an hour and a half and found out just what kind of true American gentleman this individual is. And I'll talk about it in a minute as well. I don't know if you are collecting Marfion or Protec knives, but this knife is made by Mr. Mike Irie. Mike Irie is the person who puts this crazy complex grinds on Protec knives, and I believe some of the Microtech customs. Little did I know that he makes complete knives himself, and that's a fixed blade, simple, straightforward, but it has features that speak of masterful craftsmanship. The next knife was made by a South African gentleman, and his name is Wellen Steenkamp. Here's how you spell it. This maker has a small shop in South Africa where he makes about a dozen to 2 dozen knives a month. And these knives are perfect in every respect. This gentleman does not use a CNC machine in his shop. Everything you see here was machined on a manual mill. And since Mike, my dealer from Maryland, brought 2 knives that are the same model, but no 2 knives that Wellen makes look exactly alike. I'm going to put the case back to where it was and move the knives onto my bench where I can show you every little detail. It might be a little heavy for the knife video, but here's the quote from Lincoln movie that inspired me purchasing this knife.
A compass I learned when I was surveying. It'll point you true north from where you're standing. But it's got no advice about the swamps, deserts, and chasms that you'll encounter along the way. If in pursuit of your destination you plunge ahead heedless of obstacles and achieve nothing more than to sink in a swamp, what's the use of knowing true north?
This knife, as I mentioned, was my first venture into MagnaCut. Very early comer to this market. I think he started making them in that steel in early 2023. And what caught my eye on this knife is the blade is not ground. The primary bevel here is not ground on the grinder or the belt. It's actually milled on the mill, which requires to place the blade in a fixture that holds it at this angle so that the mill comes in flat, and then flip it over and place it so this side is now horizontal and the mill can come in and do the pattern. And you can see there's longitudinal cutter markings on it. I don't think it detracts from the blade. On the contrary, I thought it was a unique, labor-consuming way to make a knife and somehow appreciated it. The scales are titanium, and then there is a titanium liner, but if you look at the thickness of the liner, it's more actually like a frame with an overlay, although technically it's still called a liner lock. Very robust liner lock, really good lockup, uh, decent detent, and indestructible knife in my opinion. And I like how he actually mills his own hardware here. I like how the screw is captured. I'm sorry, the nut, the pivot nut is captured, and even the hex here is milled and then etched, made in USA. The blade itself has minimal patterning. There's no logo, and I like it just says MagnaCut because back in early 23, that was rare, and that was the chisel. I think that fascination will subside now that everyone and their cousin makes a knife in MagnaCut. And this MagnaCut actually got 62.5 hardness out of measuring this blade, and I thought it was decent for MagnaCut. I think it's actually a perfect range for the blade this size. And as I said earlier, the styling reminds me of like 1930s Art Deco designs that you see on old trains, tractors, and other items. It's just a really cool design. I also like the arch here that transfers stresses from thrusts really well when it's curved on this side. And it's a true Warncliffe with an absolutely straight edge, no curve or recurve, and a perfectly executed 45-degree Warncliffe arch. Excellent knife, and even now, after owning it for a couple of years and carrying it for months, I still enjoy holding it in my hand. The perfect ergonomics, really decent American-made knife. When you look at dagger-styled knives, I find it very difficult to find a knife that has a perfect balance between width, length, handle proportions as related to the blade length, etc. Not to mention ergonomics that are sort of not too grandfatherly. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I saw this Medford knife on a shelf in a store that I frequently visit. Because, you know, it just sat there looking like this, and I simply couldn't pass it up. I like bare titanium. This one has some kind of like pewter patina to it. Lightly anodized hardware. None of the garish gas station details he's been putting on some of the knives. Um, Even a lanyard slot is present. Somehow he figured out the way to fit it, even though the balance between the handle and the blade is near perfect. A coffin style pocket clip, probably not the best utilitarian clip in my experience, but I think the theme here is followed really well. This is class, and it's beautiful. S45 VN is the steel, my favorite for the pocket knife blades. I prefer it to everything, including MagnaCut. Really good steel. And with the geometry here, where that sort of stiffener rib right here, that stiffener comes all the way to the very tip. So, and the faux edge here on this side, it's just sexy. I don't know what it is about this knife that drives me nuts, but in a good way. It's a beautiful knife, and you can see it still belongs to the generation of hand ground hollow grinds. It's a very shallow hollow grind, but that enables this very robust blade to be a good cutter. I like that it doesn't, it doesn't have as strong a spring as your typical, say, something like ProTech or Kershaw, but I wasn't able to fail it. So the way I check, if I arrest the motion here, can it still open? And how far up the springs traverse can it still open? So I don't think this spring is weak. I've seen some reviewers complain about that. I like the cross section in places almost square, right in the middle. So when you hold the knife in your hand, you feel no hot spots. And the defensive grip is perfect because you can actually, even with a medium-sized hand, you can reach the pommel of the knife for a defensive grip. And I can totally manipulate it with one hand. So I think that was the best knife Medford made. I have more popular models, but I think definitely that's the best. Don't worry, there is nothing wrong with your screen or the video. I just wanted to show you what the next knife looks like in the dark. 365 Terrain Terravantium. A very well made knife with premium materials, but this is not why it's in this video. Here's why. The blade made entirely out of dendritic cobalt, which only looks like steel, but in fact isn't. Can you see this tree bark looking pattern poking through the surface of the secondary bevel? This is actually the dendritic cobalt structure that can be seen under this microscope at about 50-60x. The reason it looks three-dimensional is because I stropped this knife quite a bit in an attempt to make it feel sharp. And I couldn't get it to the same level of sharpness as I usually get my knives, but somehow it still cuts through fibrous materials, even with an edge that looks like this. The blade is pretty thick behind the edge. It measures 38 to 42 thousandths of an inch. And the grind on the primary bevel is a saber height, flat grind, reaching about 50% of the blade. So not exactly a born slicer. Not a laser beam, but it can do it all day long. It just has this ability to keep on cutting no matter how much you abuse it. McNees PM knife probably doesn't need introduction. And that's his first venture into MagnaCut. Full titanium construction on the handle. Very basic log bar here. He does not put log bar stops on his knives. Everything is simplicity about this knife. I find the handle shape very attractive and ergonomic in any grip. Perfect for hard work, self-defense, anything in between. I like the jimping. It's in the right spot and at a right depth. But what I absolutely love about this knife, this is a knife that I can abuse all day long and don't get a scratch on it and still have it look like a gentleman's knife if I have to pull it out of the pocket and use it in a public setting somewhere. The blade is straight with a very aggressive belly here, which enables you to make really deep cuts in the wood or on a cutting board when you're slicing and dicing your food. I like the simplicity of these thumb studs. You know, this is a knife you take to Mars with you because there's nothing here that can easily fail, and there's everything that you need in a knife right here. So I had an hour and a half long conversation with the maker over the phone a few months back. His name is Jonathan McNees. He runs this company with his wife, and they have 5 or 6 employees from what he told me. So very small company. And yet he asked me specifically not to call this a custom knife or mid-tech or small batch. He considers this a production model, and he wants the viewers to know that. Not that he's not capable of making a beautiful custom knife, and that's in the name of the company, but this is not a custom knife that was individually made. He even admitted that this pattern is milled by CNC. It's not a random pattern, even though it was made to look like it's completely random. Made in USA, you can see that he also machines rather than grinds the blades. Everything is done in the house except the heat treat. He outsources it to one of the most prominent heat treat companies in the US. They actually produce and heat treat tester blocks to certify hardness testers. So they know what they're doing. And when I asked him what hardness he was shooting for, he said between 62 and 63. I think it's a great equilibrium point for MagnaCut. But let's test this theory. Here's my Leap style tester. I've proven it right video after video after video, and I'm fully confident that it gives me a good, solid, correct average after 5 strikes. As you just saw me calibrating in a block that is rated 787 points HLD. My viewers seem to enjoy my little hardness test. This is a very accurate test. I'm getting plus or minus 0.2 points of HRC. If you would like me to continue, please hit the like button or share this video with your friends. That lets me and the algorithm know that you're interested in this type of videos. Thank you. The beep you're about to hear means calculating average. Like he said, spot on. And all I can say is thank you, John, for delivering. All right, showing this knife under artificial light doesn't do it justice, so I filmed it earlier in the day outside. Let me show it to you. Starting with this very supple, very thick leather sheet, handmade, CPM 154 steel. His name, signature on the other side. And look at the perfect little jimping there. Maple wood handle with G10 bolsters. Supple is a good word to describe everything. Hand rubbed primary grind, which is a very shallow hollow grind, almost the entire width of the blade. The handle was clearly assembled and then shaped to the final dimensions and then polished altogether as a monolith. Beautifully done riveting with holes, so you can actually use it in a survival quote-unquote situation. Some small imperfections here and there to show that it's a handmade item. I didn't bring the price up with any of the knives in this video. We're in a collector's territory, but I will bring it up with this knife because I want you to know that you can get into that territory for a reasonable price. So Mike, my local dealer, purchased this knife directly from Mike Irie at the Blade Show 24 in Atlanta, Georgia. So Mike Irie made a little money, my dealer made a little money, and all I paid for it was $200. Now, tell me in the comments, do you think it was a good price to pay? This knife is Chris Reeve 31 Sebenza. There isn't much else I need to say about this knife. And the reason I'm starting on this side, I don't want the pattern on the handle to distract you from how beautiful this blade is. Take a moment to appreciate this beautiful hollow grind with satin finish. and just an overall simple aesthetic of this knife. And then you have this. I'll tell you, if you're lucky enough to find it somewhere for sale, just go ahead and splurge. Because most likely, if you're holding it and it's for sale, that's probably the last time or the last opportunity that you will have to buy it in retail. All right, Wellen Steenkamp, a South African maker, member of the guild there. Unobtainium. Reason? He makes 12 to 20 knives a month. And from what I've seen, most of his knives look quite traditional. So this model called Escape, both of them are the same model, just different materials. He handpicks materials for every design. So while the pattern is the same, he designs each knife individually, and he makes sure that there is a balance physically and aesthetically between the handle and the blade. Zirconium bolsters here. And as I mentioned earlier, he machines everything on a manual mill. Both knives have thick titanium liners. They're technically liner locks, but the liners are thick. Perfect action. There's knurling on the flipper. And I have to say, compared to jimping that I experienced on all other flippers that I have, this gives you like a finger weld. It stabilizes the tip of your finger on the flipper. There can be no slip. So that emphasizes how well adjusted is the detent. This blade is a Chad Nichols bacon pattern stainless Damascus. So what is bacon pattern? They layer steels, high carbon and lower carbon stainless, and they just layer them and then they hammer them down evenly so you don't get the wave that you normally see in a Damascus. But these steel plates and wires are forged together to form this pattern, and then when he grinds it, the pattern shows up and it's kind of three-dimensional. The reason is he etches them a little longer to get this three-dimensional effect. Marble carbon fiber, and as you can see, and I'll get to this knife in a second, there are two totally different grades and totally different looks. This little guy is more of a dresser, and so he's showing his name here on the blade. That's a beautiful Damasteel pattern, powder metallurgy Damascus, and it's not on the blade. He just threw in a bolster made out of this stuff. Fingerprints all over. Yeah. Also three-dimensional. I think with Damasteel you would have to actually use a polishing wheel to get this effect, like a softer polishing wheel. Buffer. This almost looks homemade, the carbon fiber here, because you see some imperfections, porosity, stuff like that, but somehow it matches the Damasteel pattern here. And the spacer is Damasteel as well, but he's only showing the spine of it. You can see almost like a fingerprint pattern here. And a Damasteel pocket clip. M390 steel here. And let me show you the mastery of machining under the microscope. What you're looking at is the pivot hardware. This is the screw and the Damascus accent. And it's kind of hard to judge the precision without the scale. So I'm going to show you the gap between the zirconium and the carbon fiber on the handle. Nice and straight, parallel sides. But what is the scale here? How wide the gap is? Well, here it is next to a human hair. So a human hair is about 5/1000ths, 4/1000ths of an inch thick, and this gap is about half of its diameter. I worked at a machine shop for 7 years in my younger days, and only an absolute master of machining could have done this on a manual mill.